Hello, and welcome to Tableau Tuesday. For those of you who have joined us previously, I want to be the first to welcome you back. But anyone who's joining us for the first time, I'm really glad that you're here. Tableau Tuesday is a monthly webinar series put on by your local solution engineers, spotlighting our favorite projects and the latest and greatest in Tableau. This month, we're going to be looking at what is new in Tableau with our semi-annual product update. So this month we'll be going through our two most recent releases for the beginning half of 2020. A couple of housekeeping items first. Everyone that comes into this webinar is muted by default, and we do ask that you remain muted for the duration of the presentation. We have a lot of folks on today and a lot of content to get through. So that said, we do want to hear your questions as we go. And if you do have any, I encourage you to put them in the Q&A section of the WebEx. So rather than going into that chat, which I'm very used to doing as well, avoid the chat. Yes, you heard that correctly. And instead go into that three-dot menu on the WebEx bar and go into Q&A. We've done this a couple times now, and we've seen that the Q&A is a little bit easier to manage questions without having to keep track of them in the chat. So we thank you in advance for working with us on that one. So quick little intros on our side. So I mentioned that we are your local Tableau team here. My name is Brianna Newman. I'm one of the senior solution engineers over here at Tableau. I've actually only been with Tableau for about 6 months. So I've been learning a lot in that amount of time, and I'm really excited to share that with you all. I'm currently in Los Angeles. So I'm probably working with a couple of you out there already, but realistically, I work with customers all over the country. So I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to show you what's new. Also on the line, we have Steve Martinez, who is our Director of Solution Engineering. He's going to be manning that Q&A section and making sure that all of your questions are answered. If not, then we're going to be able to follow up on those later. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into what we're actually doing today. A little bit on the agenda here. We're going to do two separate chunks of content. I know PowerPoint, not always everyone's favorite, but it's a good way to stay organized. So we'll do a little bit of content, some good context for any of the updates in Tableau. And then we'll jump into a short demo for some of those more visual analytics type of features. So we'll repeat that two times, once for 2020.1 and once for 2020.2, again with a PowerPoint chunk of information, and then jump into a demo. So that's kind of what you can expect. Also kind of align expectations on what we will be covering and what we won't be covering. And let's go ahead and get started with 2020.1. So what's new in 2020.1 for connecting to data? It's always good to start with connecting to data. It's where a lot of our data journeys begin. So new connectors in data management. So now you can connect more data from external assets. We've added support for Google BigQuery, Google Drive, Google Sheets, so the whole Google family is now here, as well as Box, Dropbox, and OneDrive. Also, we've added Hive and Impala connectors. So many of our big data customers have been wanting these connectors for quite a long time. But the problem was each connector had some pretty complex dialogues that weren't easy to adapt in Tableau. So now that the support exists in Tableau for these more complex dialogues, we've been able to migrate these connectors to take advantage of that functionality. Also, we've made some updates to our connectors, namely for Salesforce. If you haven't heard, Tableau was acquired by Salesforce, and honestly, that entire experience has been an incredible journey for both of our technologies. So once we were allowed to work together in tandem, we were allowed to kind of review our Salesforce connector and take that as an opportunity to improve it. So we went ahead and added activity history and campaign influence as objects that Tableau can connect to directly. And we also took a look at the API we were using to interact with Salesforce, and we were able to make an enormous improvement. So something to the effect of a 2,000 row table that would previously take 28 seconds now takes about 2 seconds. So that's a pretty significant improvement in performance, and we're really pleased to be working with Salesforce from here on out. Also, in the realm of updates, we have made some updates to Snowflake as well. So, using a Snowflake database requires very precise access to the data, and this is actually done through their roles. Functionality. So while Tableau hasn't supported roles in the past, 2020.1 going forward is going to support those roles and giving you more precise access to your Snowflake data. Also new in 2020.1 are a couple of items in Tableau Prep. It's a lesser known fact that Prep actually releases about 4 times as often as our quarterly releases for server and desktop. And so there's a lot more frequently updated information to sort through. So these are a couple of the highlights of 2020.1 for Prep. The first of which, being my personal favorite, is now level of detail calculations, or LOD as I interchangeably call them. I'm sure a lot of the Tableau community does the same. So if you have been using Tableau for a while, you might use our level of detail calculations as a powerful calculation for controlling the level of detail in your view, regardless of the aggregation. So now Tableau Prep can do the same heavy lifting on these calculations in a very visual and syntax-free way. So as you can tell by that picture on the slide in the foreground, this is actually the dialogue for building that LOD calculation. You'll see that you don't have to write any code. It's pick and choose, and it's all very friendly and visual, showing you what part of that data set it's pulling in. So we'll take a look at that in our demo. I particularly like this. Also new in Tableau Prep is connections highlighting. So you can track your inputs and get a better idea of which tables are pulling from which connections. So in a more of a simple flow, this might seem kind of silly, but as they get more complex and you might need to switch out some of the tables, it's going to be a lot easier to identify which inputs come from which tables in which data source, so you can easily switch those out. One other update I will call out here is the button to pause updates in Tableau Prep. So by default, Prep will refresh your feed to help you see those results immediately and help you make decisions on what to do next. And live feedback honestly is ideal and critical for knowing how your changes propagate. This isn't always welcome when it's a large data set and you have a lot of steps that you have predetermined that you do for all of your data. So this pause button is going to prevent your data from flowing into Tableau Prep so you can do some bulk actions, especially if you are using the bulk flow. I believe it's save as steps, and you're inserting that all at once. You don't have to wait for your data to flow in for each portion of that flow. So it makes it a little bit quicker for bulk actions. A couple new items in the data management add-on as well. Namely, we have the capability to embed your cloud credentials in Prep Conductor now. So previously, a user would need to configure their credentials for their connections in a server or online ahead of working with a flow. So you'd have to have some good foresight knowing where you're going before you actually get there. Because without that step, that configuring your credentials in the cloud provider, the prep flow simply wouldn't run. So you were kind of dead in your tracks. So adding the embedding of cloud credentials for the prep conductor, it allows you to publish directly from the dialog. Also, we have added a little bit of an app polish here. We've added the ability to disable incompatible conductor features with your server. So only the compatible features with your environment will be allowed. Again, just little polishing item. In the past, this was not the case. Those incompatible features were not disabled, and it could kind of get you into a bit of a mess. So just making sure that human interaction is clean. Next, getting into some of the more fun stuff. So we do have a couple of new updates in 2020.1 for visual analytics. And honestly, these are all pretty big ones. So we will be demoing the first three here shortly. But namely, we do have Viz animations. We've been trying to get around this one for, however long it's been, just using add-ons or using data extension. And now we've brought you Viz animations to be used in-house. You don't have to install anything, no programming, nothing. So Viz animations do live within Tableau Desktop. And what these do is they automatically and seamlessly automate your Viz marks, panes, and other elements with underlying data changes. So as those Vizes animate, the viewer can easily understand where the data evolves, and this can potentially uncover some insight that otherwise you wouldn't have seen. These animations are particularly powerful for storytelling, as you can track a mark's evolution across a set rather than having to track it across distinctive filter changes. So we'll go into some of the best practices on Viz animations. It's actually pretty subtle and a good and bad way to use them. So we'll hit on that as well. Also new is one of our most requested features of all time, and that is the dynamic parameter. So now Tableau can refresh a parameter list of values based on the data sources updates each time the workbook opens. So if you were anyone that was using the previous version of parameters, you would know you'd have to occasionally go into your workbook, update that parameter list, and then republish. So really, your data was only as fresh as you could go through and make those updates. So this is kind of a big one. It's going to allow your data to be fresh every time that parameter or that workbook is open. Also on this list is buffer calculations. So this is kind of evolving our spatial data visualization portfolio as well. So this is going to allow you to make a buffer zone around a particular point. So you can do this with images and using X and Y coordinates, or as I'll show in my demo, we will be working with geospatial data, so latitude and longitude, and seeing how buffers can change, overlap, and actually help you realize how close or far away points are from each other. So gives good context to the actual space that you're working with. Then a couple of improvements for explained data. So we have some performance improvements for wide data sets specifically. We've also made the dialogue for explained data resizable. Kind of a funny little detail, but it was feedback that we listened to. So now you can resize that little pop-up box for explained data. And we've also added a status bar for easy alert notifications. So making the ask data interaction a little bit more smooth. What's new in 2020.1 for Tableau Online? These are all pretty popular features in Tableau Desktop, and we've just brought them to the web. So specifically exporting a dashboard as an image, PDF, or PowerPoint. This is going to keep your workflow nice and agile. So rather than downloading your workbook back into Desktop and then exporting that file from there, you can export it directly from online. Also, we've added a page shelf and Vision tooltip in browser. So some of our more popular, really wow functions that allow you to visualize your data that everyone really loves in desktop. We've brought those onto online, and we've brought that parity between desktop and online even closer. Lastly, we've made a couple of map improvements. This is namely for the washout of the map and also a couple of map layer improvements. All right, so our last slide of 2020.1 for updates before we jump into demo. And we're just going to tackle IT and governance here quick. So one of the first items on this list is license-based login management, or LBLM. So this is specifically to allow users to activate their desktop and prep licenses without a product key. So if you're ever one of those people who hit the wrong letter or the wrong number of a product key, you'll know how valuable this is. If you hit the wrong key, it's time consuming, it's tedious, and your initial reaction to signing into a product isn't very good. So rather than entering a product key that someone on your team has to manage and make sure gets crossed off of a list somewhere, you can just log into your server using your username and password. So this will do a couple of things aside from preventing you from making the right keystrokes or not. It's going to bring you in closer with your server. It's going to make it easier to publish your workbooks up onto a server, and it's going to be a lot easier to pull those data sources that are available to you down. So while product keys themselves are kind of a messy interaction, logging in through your server is going to bring you closer under the umbrella of that data governance and also uh, allowing it to be easier to share your work. Next, we also have added external file store. So now you can leverage network storage devices for backup snapshots. And what this will do, it will reduce the time to perform a backup. And this also eliminates the need to run file stores on multiple nodes in a cluster. So that frees up some of your nodes for other processes you might need to run. Last one I'll call out on this page is our opportunity or our new nested project feature. So before you could really only lock your permissions on a top level project, which was great until you had a lot of top level projects in your server because everyone wanted to use those precise permissions. So that got a little messy. Now with locked projects, you can maintain a consistent level of permissions without having to designate it as a top level project. So kind of reserving that top level project designation for what it's meant for rather than this project has a locked set of permissions. And with that, we have completed our first chunk of PowerPoint, and now we're going to take a look at our 2020.1 demo. There we go. Okay, so first off the bat, I do want to talk about animations. They were definitely the one that I was the most excited to put together a demo for. And just for sake of purpose, this is all built into Tableau. So under that format, you can go straight down to animations. And you can even apply this to your old workbooks in the new 2020.1 version and kind of see what those older workbooks are going to look like under the new animation. But here are a couple of notes. You can turn the animations on for a workbook default. So if you don't say explicitly what sheet can be animated or shouldn't be animated, you can set that default here. So right now, mine is off. It's going to have a pretty predictable interaction that we're used to with Tableau. But if I turn them on, it's going to turn on for default and we'll see that data animate immediately, giving us a little preview of what we have ahead of us. So with that, we turn on our animations. We can choose how quickly we want those animations to show up in our viz. And there's also two separate styles of animation. Namely, we have sequential and simultaneous. So these are kind of hinting at what they do, but sequential is going to change one sheet at a time in your dashboard. Simultaneous is going to change everything at once. So take that with a grain of salt that if everything's changing all at once, it's going to be hard to track that movement of a point across data changes. So keep that in mind. I'm going to stick with sequential. Further down here, you can also choose on a sheet level which sheets have animation turned on and which ones have it turned off. You can set it for the default, which will abide by whatever you establish up here. I will just keep it as default for now. So just click around a little bit more, show you what that does look like. Maybe we'll click all and then none, add a couple in at a time. And we'll see that data transform. And again, this is just profit sales. This is our Superstore data set that comes with every download of desktop. So if you want to get in here, build this viz, play around with it, I welcome you to do that. So, evolving this conversation a little bit more, I started wondering what happens when we make a full dashboard of items with animation? What does that look like? So, this is a little bit of thought that needs to go into using animations. So, my personal experience with animations, I was excited to jump into my old workbooks to add everything animation and see what happened. And I will tell you what happened. It was chaos. So, coming from a world of visual analytics and making it easy to extract what information is in a viz or a dashboard, it's very, very important that you maintain that goal of making the extraction of that information easy. So let's see here. I think this animation is on, this animation is also on, and this one is on as well. So as I click through here and I add more and more and more filters, and it looks kind of bad on the WebEx, my apologies. So as I do add these filters, we'll see everything changing behind it. We're adding rows down here. We're adding a couple more points on our scatter plot. These mountains are kind of moving up and down over here. Visually, from a perception standpoint, it's very difficult for me to know what of this information is one, changing, and two, what is important. Thankfully, I do have the sequential animation style turned on, so it's going to animate one of these at a time rather than all of them at once. So of the two, this is kind of the less perceptually taxing. So keeping that in mind, do consider these things when you are adding animations to your visualizations, and just make sure that they are there to add emphasis rather than confusion. So certainly fun to play around with. I think they're very easy to use and even to apply to old workbooks like I recommended. So I encourage you to get in there and try them out. Of course, creativity is the limit. So that's kind of my little soapbox spiel for the duration of this presentation. But animations, I strongly encourage them. Next, we have our dynamic parameters. So this use case is kind of, well, what if you took a test every month and you wanted to compare how you did on that same test last year versus this year? So as you can tell with how I've set up this viz, I am not doing so hot this month, but I can come over here, select a month to compare. So let's say, oh, maybe I do better. I don't remember what these scores say. Let's take a look at September. So, okay, I did a lot better in September. Maybe look into February. Great. So, looking at this list, we'll see that it only goes up to April of this year. So we need to do some updating. So I'll go ahead and actually pull the spreadsheet that this is feeding from. And here are our months. And then this is just a random number generator. So it's going to jump around a little bit. Don't be so concerned about that as much as the content going into it. So we'll add maybe May, and maybe we can tell the future and we know what we're going to get for June, and we'll do July as well while we're here. Okay, so just pull that number down, give us a couple of scores to play with. All right, so I did mention this briefly in the PowerPoint slide, but these changes in the select month will propagate when that workbook is opened. So to show you the differences and to pull in the new changes, I'm going to go ahead and open that again. Now we'll save the changes. So reopening that workbook is going to pull in those new dates in the parameter picker, and we'll be able to see the changes. Oh, hey, look in 80, I've passed one of the tests. So now, before we were only up to March, but now or I guess we were up to April, but adding May, June, and July here, that pulled in right as I opened the workbook again. So to kind of drill into how to do that, looking at the parameter itself, I have it set up just as a list that's pulling through the dates in the data. And here under fixed, that's going to be the old way that we used to do parameters. If you aren't worried about the parameter dynamically updating, absolutely select fixed. It's easy to keep track of. However, if you're using dates, anything else that data might be changing a lot and feeding into a calculation, you can choose to have the parameter update when the workbook opens. So here I can select which of my sheets I'm pulling from and what column I'm pulling from in that sheet. So that's really all you need to keep in mind for updating your parameters dynamically, and just a couple of setting changes, and then those changes will propagate when you open that workbook. So it's not going to push through if it's open already and then you make changes. You need to go through and open that workbook again. All right, so moving right along here, jumping into buffer calculations. So when I initially looked at buffer calculations, I was thinking about some of the real life use cases I could use it for. And I started thinking about when I was a kid, we wouldn't fly very often. So when we did fly, we were kind of trying to save some money. So we would see which airports are nearby where we wanted to go and kind of do a bit of a cost analysis on if it was worth it to save the money on the airline tickets, rent a car and drive the rest of the way, or just to fly directly into the city. So I kind of built a viz around that. So I'll show you what we're working with, and then we'll work backwards and show you how I built it. So right now we have a radius picker, which is actually a parameter. So I can choose what radii that I am willing to drive in my rental car from an airport to make that worth it. So let's say to make that cost worth it to me, I am willing to drive, let's say 70 miles. Okay, so if I'm wanting to go anywhere kind of in the south, we can choose a number of different airports. Granted, 70 miles is a fair amount of distance. Or I can choose fewer and we'll start to weed out some of the airports that might not be as close as we want them to be. Okay, so with the buffer calculation, we're just going to clear this out and build it from scratch. So what we're used to doing with Tableau, if you do a lot of maps, you're used to doing latitude, or that's longitude, latitude, and then maybe putting the place, let's see here, airport name, place name, there it is, here, to get a scatter plot, and it's going to animate, of course. So we get an idea of where each of these airports are. So next, what our knee-jerk reaction in Tableau is right now is to add that buffer calculation wherever it can go. The only place we can put it is on detail, and you'll notice that nothing really changed. So this is one item that well, I had to get used to when working with the buffer calculation, and I wanted to share it with you all. Uh, is the buffer calculation has these points built into it. So you don't have to build the viz with the airports on it and then add the buffer calculation on top of it. It's much more simple. So clearing this out one more time, we're going to take a look at that buffer calculation and how it's built. Okay, so we'll take a look here. Here we have our buffer calculation setting us up. And within it, we have a make point calculation nested. So if you haven't used a make point calculation before, effectively it's going to be making a point. So it's using the latitude and longitude of those 2 points to, well, make a point. So with this, you could do X and Y coordinates on an image. There's a lot of flexibility within the make point to graphically view space. So from there, we have our latitude and our longitude. Following that, we can set a static radius if we wanted it to only be 30 miles, always 30 miles. We could put that in to the calculation and hard code it, or we could add what I did. I did a parameter. So that radius parameter down here is going to be, I think it's steps of 5 from 0 to 100, let's say. So we can change that buffer calculation, increase the size of that bubble, or restrict it. Last component, a unit. We want to make sure that we don't accidentally inflate or deflate our data by using uh, the wrong units. So now that we have that calculation built, we don't have to put it on top of an existing map. We can just drag it into the viz. And then we'll stay organized and add the detail as well. There we go. So now we can hover over any of these areas and see what airports they are. Then we'll turn on that radius parameter one more time. And now we can get an idea for how close any of these airports actually are. So in my childhood, if I were using this, I would think that all of these airports in Southern California were actually pretty close together and we could fly into any of them. Me as an adult, knowing how bad traffic is in Southern California, realizes how much of a naive understanding that is. So it's a fun story. Sometimes an application doesn't always work. So buffer calculations. Uh, in this particular example, I'm using them to visualize space between airports. On a more kind of solemn note, we can use them to visualize spaces within offices. So this viz actually comes from one of our Zen masters, Ken Flerlage. There's two of them. He has a twin brother. This one is Ken. So this is actually a visualization that he built to help inform safe opening practices for when we start to transition to reopening a lot of our offices across the country. So using that buffer calculation, he has a 6-foot radius around any of the desks in a floor plan for an office. So blue pass and red fail because they are too close together. So again, using the buffer calculation to visualize what is safe and what is not safe. So when we initially released the buffer calculation, we didn't anticipate this being one of the use cases. However, I'm very thankful that we do have it given the situation that we're currently in. So we're using this to inform good ways to safely open offices going forward. All right, so that concludes our 2020.1 demo. And now jumping back into our agenda. There we go. So we have tackled 2020.1. We went through all of those items. We went through the demo. So now kind of repeating that process one more time, going through what those new releases are for 2020.2, and then finishing up on a demo for metrics and set control. And if you don't know what those are, I'll let you know what they are in the next couple of minutes or so. So jumping right back in here, one of our biggest releases or one of our biggest changes that's coming in the 2020.2 release is our new object model, which we are calling relationships. Nice catchy name. So relationships are the new data modeling capabilities in 2020.2, and these are especially powerful as they combine data from different tables by looking at what columns those tables have in common, and then using that information to bring data from each table together in analysis. So in not as many words, relationships are going to make those one-to-many and many-to-many relationships much easier. If you've used data in the past that has the one-to-many and many-to-many relationships, you'll know some of the things that we've developed to try and maintain the integrity of the data, one of which being the level of detail calculation. So making sure that uh, rows aren't duplicated and data isn't inflated because you have one of those unique relationships in your data. So with the new data model, it's going to be able to sense these types of relationships and architect your data in a way that it does not inflate it and protects the integrity and accuracy of that data. So a couple of items on this. I'm not going to dive into it very much. We do have an upcoming bit of content coming for you from Tableau Tuesday on this. So we're just going to touch on it very briefly today. But a couple of notes first. The new relationship model is going to improve the interaction of joining data, but it will not get rid of joins and blends. So those joins are still going to be there. You can still view them. If you were to download 2020.2 this afternoon and start playing around in some of your older workbooks in the new version, those joins are still there. So that will not be impacted. Also, if you are a big proponent of level of detail calculations, and trust me, I know a lot of people who are, it will not get rid of LODs entirely. The LOD calculation is exceptionally powerful, and the amount of things that it can do likely will never be covered by relationships entirely. So if you are an LOD proponent, they are safe as well. However, the new relationship model will be reducing your reliance on LODs. So kind of a little give, a little take there. Overall, the new relationship model is going to make your data more accurate and easier to work with, especially for more users uh, in your organization that maybe might not be as used to working with star and snowflake type of schemas. So it's going to make these data relationships a lot easier to work with. Next, what's new in 2024? Metric tracking. Metric tracking is let's try and define it. So it's going to be more of a headline for your data rather than the robust and visually stunning vizzes that we're used to building. So this is aimed more at KPI tracking, executives who are trying to track their numbers and make data-driven decisions quickly and make them accurately. So metric tracking is where you can choose numbers in the dashboards that you are tracking, and you can just create a headline of that data. So you can see it at a glance if it's trending, if it's going up, if it's going down, the percentage of how much it's gone up or down. It's kind of like a stock ticker. So easy to extract that data, understand it, and make any changes very quickly. Also, a couple of new updates for data in 2020.2. Namely, we've improved the OData connector for SAP and HANA. I know a couple of users who are very excited about this. Also, we have added the Esri WDC as a named web data connector. So this is going to allow users to connect directly to data sources published by the Esri platform. So previously, this was a very manual data update, but not anymore. I'm sure that's a huge relief for a number of users. Also, we've added incremental refresh to Tableau Prep. So now you can set up your prep flow to only process the rows that are new since the previous time you ran the flow. So rather than uh, refreshing all of the rows, we can only pull in the ones that are new. So that's going to improve that performance and also just kind of speed things along. Couple of improvements in Tableau Catalog. Customers have been asking for a more prominent alerting system for data quality warnings, and we actually listened. So we have added a setting for high visibility banners in the data quality warnings to address that request. These warnings are more prominent to a viewer and they're less likely to be overlooked. Also improved in Catalog are the improved data discovery and added dashboards in data lineage. So just a couple items for data updates. What's new in Visual Analytics 2020.2? There's a couple around here, not as many big hitters as our 2020.1 release. And most of those are within Ask Data. So within Ask Data, we now have custom suggestions. So this gives you complete control over the initial questions that Ask Data suggests your end user when they're first getting started in their analysis. So you can customize those questions to be a little bit closer to your use case and set them off in the right direction as they start to use it. Also, we've added data roles in Ask Data improvements as well. So with data roles within Ask Data, a user can add a synonym to a date field or value, and then Ask Data can capture a copy of that metadata, and other data sources can inherit those fields. So this is going to save a ton of time in data curation, and it makes it easier to have consistent and accurate data models for analysis. One last item on Ask Data is Ask Data and the new data model, the relationships that we were talking about earlier. So published data sources curated with the new data model will seamlessly integrate with Ask Data. So pretty hands-off. And this is going to allow users to ask questions about more flexible data models than before. So just kind of evolving Ask Data along with our new relationships. Also, within Tableau Desktop itself, we've added some set actions. So previously, users had to hold down the Command or Control key to maintain the previously selected marks and extend it to an additional selection. So anytime you wanted to extend your choices, your previous ones disappeared. So another kind of subtle, annoying thing that was happening, we went ahead and cleaned that up, made it a little bit more intuitive. Also, we have our set control, and I will be demoing this one in our 2020.2 demo. So set control dovetails beautifully with some of the recent features we've released, such as dynamic parameters, set actions, and perimeter actions. And it's all of these together are creating a very comprehensive range of analytical options that are otherwise impossible even just a year ago. So set control allows end users to alter the members of a set into a calculation through a quick filter like UI. So it's easy to designate inputs for calculations, and you can drive a more sophisticated analysis. So again, this is a good one for demoing because it's very visual and easy to understand when it's visual. Out of context, sometimes it can be a little intimidating. So we'll take a look at that one together. It's kind of a fun use case. And lastly, you might have caught this in my initial demo. We've made a couple of improvements to the UI as well, specifically around the data pane. So the measures and dimensions are gone. This might make some of you panic, but don't worry. Though they are not explicitly labeled anymore, they are going to be grouped under their sources. So really, they're a little bit more organized under the tables that they come from. So any fields that are common among several tables will go to the bottom. Um, they are still color coded, but we've just organized them in a way that's going to work better for the setup of relationships in that new data model. All right, so what's new in IT and governance? There's a couple of items on this page. I'm not going to go into all of them in the interest of time, but some of the big ones, the admin view refresh. We wanted to help our admins out and get their views a little bit more easier to use. So we have some stats around what content is currently unused, and we've also built them a dashboard dedicated to backgrounder resources. Those backgrounder resources, very important to maintain, so we wanted to dedicate an entire dashboard to only those so they did not get lost. Also, a quick note on load balancing. We have added extract query load balancing, and this is going to have capabilities in 2020.2 that improve how queries are routed to hyperprocesses on server nodes. So that's going to increase the performance of how those extract queries are run. All right, couple new items on web and mobile before we dive back into our second and last demo. So hang in with me here. So a couple of items here, namely we've made some accessibility improvements. We always want to stay on top of those, make sure that we are accessible. And we've also made some mobile app improvements as well. So this includes deep linking improvements, and we also added a home tab on mobile and recommendations on mobile. I didn't even know that mobile didn't have a home tab until I had one day. Kind of that inattentional blindness, I suppose. Also, some improvements around OpenID. So we've added flexibility for securely accessing your server through mobile. This also improves the parity between server on desktop and server on mobile in the security realm. Also on this page, we have publish via browser. And this one I'm pretty excited about, but this feature allows users to directly upload a Tableau workbook to their sites without having to use desktop, REST API, or tab command. So this cuts out the need to pull down workbooks into desktop before pushing them up into server. You can just directly upload them onto your server. We also, well, this says what's new, but this next item, starters, have always been on server. So starters on homepage, I suppose, is the new component. So Tableau dashboard starters have always been on server, but they were always kind of buried on a Tableau site. So hardly any of our users knew that they were there or that they could use them. And we've decided that the utility of these starters is so significant that we needed to bring them more into the light. So if you haven't used a dashboard starter before, they're going to recommend different layouts, different vizzes that you can use depending on what data you're connecting to. So the examples here, we have Salesforce, Marketo, Oracle Eloqua, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and ServiceNow. So if you're connecting to those data sources, it can make some good recommendations in the right direction for what your vizzes can be tracking. And these are going to have visual best practices baked right in. If anything else, it'll set you off in the right direction with some new ideas that maybe you might not have had before. I encourage you to take a look the next chance you get. Okay, so with that, we have our final demo. We're going to be going through metrics and set control. So we'll go ahead and start with metrics, and I'm going to pull over my Tableau online interface. Okay, so with this one comes a little bit of story time. Let's pretend for a moment that maybe I'm an executive or some sort of sales leader that is trying to track my metrics for my team, but I'm also in a lot of meetings. I'm really busy with my own work as well, just trying to manage and also keep track of everyone's success. And let's say that someone on my team built me this dashboard that aligns with the KPIs that I'm tracking for my team and how I know they're doing their jobs. So maybe in a typical day, I wake up and I want to look at my KPIs for the day, see what they changed from the day before. Well, I don't have my glasses on. It's kind of dark. I'm trying to zoom in on these numbers on my phone. I can't really see them. Or maybe I'm trying to peek at this between a couple of meetings during the day. It's hard for me to see exactly where that number is. So this is where metrics come into play. Rather than digging through a dashboard, especially in a mobile interaction where your fingers are kind of fat and maybe you can't filter as you could on a desktop, and you just need those numbers quickly. So you might have noticed this, but there is a new button in that toolbar called metrics. So let's say we want to start tracking this red line here. We can click on that mark, go up to metrics, and start tracking that. So we can say tech orders. I could add a description if I wanted to, change the folder that it lives in, but I'll just go ahead and create this. So we'll have that confirmation banner showing me that I can go straight to that metric. It's going to isolate that line out a little bit, but instead I'm going to back up into metric dashboard. Oh, one more, project metric. Okay, so now we can see that I have a couple of other items already pulled out for tracking. And we have those top line kind of, okay, our frequency of discounts is at 462 today, 171 office supplies ordered, et cetera, et cetera. So like I mentioned, this is part of a more mobile interaction. So what I'm doing right now, I'm getting my phone pulled up so I can share this with you in the mobile interaction. Okay. So taking a look here, this is actually live on my phone. That's me scrolling back and forth. I haven't refreshed it yet, so it should pull in that new metric here shortly. So I can click into any of these metrics and see where we're at. So I can track left and right on that line, get an idea for what they were on any given day. I can even adjust and compare any of these lines. So I can say previous year, previous month, or no comparison. So maybe I'll compare for previous year. Okay, turn on that line. And then we can take a look back and see how we're tracking this year versus last year. So since each of these items are favorited right there, trying not to click on it, they're going to be on that home page as a starred bit of content. So every time I open my Tableau app on my phone, they're right there for me to view. So this hasn't quite refreshed yet, so our new metric that we're tracking hasn't showed up quite yet. So compare this interaction to jumping into this dashboard and trying to scroll along and see what this number is. It's hard to tell. Oh, I don't have my glasses on. So those comparisons for the use case are pretty significant in change. So metric tracking, a lot of fun to take your data on the move and also optimize it for those who need to see it. Coming back, we'll do one more quick demo in 2020.2, and then we'll wrap up. I'll just close this guy. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to be demoing set control here. So I'll kind of start at the end product and then work backward and show you how I built it. So set control, if you recall from the presentation, is going to make sets kind of like a quick filter interaction. So the use case for this, I miss sports. I miss watching professional sports right now. So maybe me and my friends are having a very pretend, very imaginary fantasy league draft. So let's say I wanted to take the data from last year's team, last year's everyone playing in the league, and kind of hedge my bets using data to stack my team in a data-driven way. So taking a look here, maybe I want to draft these individuals. We'll see that my average points are going to be updating for each one that I choose. So we'll see if there's any players that are going to really tip the bets in my favor. So I'm always one of those people who is stuck to drafting my favorite players rather than the players that are good. So this is kind of a move to make me more data driven in my imaginary fantasy league, which is kind of redundant if you think about imaginary and fantasy together. But as we'll see, as I choose more and more individuals from this list, that average points is going to change. And that's because it's dynamic. So backing up just a little bit here, we have the viz that builds this. So I went ahead and built a set. Excuse me. So I do have the choose your team set, and that's pulling from our data source. So just pulling through that list. And then from there, it's just two different calculations. So here we have points per game played. I believe we want points per selection. That's what I named it. So this is just going to take from the set, return the points. So choose your team, which is this set here. Then we'll show the points. Once we have the points, we can go into what is more of a level of detail calculation. So we want to lock onto that average for the set and then pulling the average for the selection. So two very simple calculations, and then the rest is just building the viz. So here we have our selections. This is just a drop down instead. And then here we just have a text box that's pulling through that attribute. I also built this out for penalty minutes so I can get a more comprehensive view of the people that I am drafting. So it's kind of funny to see the penalty minutes go up and up and up as you choose. So it's all about balance. So with that, I do want to turn it back to our presentation one more time. And we do have a couple of parting notes here. So we do have some upcoming Tableau Tuesdays on our agenda, kind of long term. So we do have the new relationship and new object model. So that one's going to be coming up. If that initial kind of toe dip into relationships was intriguing to you, I strongly encourage you join us. After that, we have are using sets and parameters. So kind of those more niche use cases of sets and parameters, just keeping your data dynamic and flexible and creating some sophisticated analysis with them. And then we also have mapping. So kind of the same thing. Some ways that you might use mapping, some ways that you haven't used mapping, that's coming up as well. So I did just get a message from Steve, who's manning our Q&A box. He says that all of our questions are wrapped up. So excellent, that's glad to hear. So with that, I want to thank you one more time for joining us today to see what's new with Tableau, and we look forward to hosting you again here soon.